Okay, if this is your first call and you're checking, where did I say I was dialing into? What exactly is this? My name's Debbie Forster. I am the CEO of the Tech Talent Charter. If this is your first drop-in session, welcome. What we try to do in this session is to replicate that world where we were in the same room and that you could chat and hear about what's going on. We want this to feel, of all of our kind of sessions, the most relaxed, the most informal. So you are welcome to have camera on, camera off. If you've had one of those weeks where your life is staring into a camera, you're welcome to have it off. This should be interactive as possible. So as we're going through, there is a chat function. Please know that you can do that. We will be recording this, so we will share that. So if, like Claire, you have to leave early, you can know that we will send this on to you. You may wish to tune into some of our past sessions. There's been some super ones. If you need it, I'm checking with Karen, we can turn on the closed captioning, can't we, Karen? Can we turn on the captioning on this? Or is it gone off? We've had this.
Yeah, I think we're having a bit of a...
Something's happened on Zoom. My closed captioning on Zoom doesn't seem to be there. So I apologize. We'll try and work on that for the next one. But I hope you're here. I hope you know that you have an opportunity to come on mic, chat, ask questions, share what's going on in this piece. Because I think, one, we're going to do a really quick whistle-stop tour about what's coming up in the next few months for the Tech Talent Charter. And then the main attraction is we're going to be talking with Olga, something we've been really excited about in talking about data. And I'm hoping others of you in the room have questions, but also stuff to share that you're doing in that space. And then we'll flag up what's coming next, and then I will send you out into the world. Also, one of the things that I think that makes this a useful session is we will use as much time as is useful and necessary to the group. Okay, so if we finish a little early, then it's my secret gift to you. Okay, because your diary says you're supposed to be here. If we finish early, if you want to take your cup outside and have a drink, if you want to hide from the kids in your study, whatever you want to do, it'll be our gift back to you. Thanks for joining us. Right, so what do we have coming up? So at the Tech Talent Charter, we do have a series of sessions that you can try and join. First of all, do always remember that if you are new to the Tech Talent Charter, if you've been here a while, but you think maybe things have changed and you're missing some of what's going on, I do recommend, or if you have someone in your organization has joined and wants to start doing more things in the Tech Talent Charter, you want to know how things are going, I highly recommend that you sign up to our New to the TTC. All right, this is a session where Karen, Director of Programs, will walk you through what is the toolkit, what are the events, how can you leverage this for your organization. So that's always on every month. We also have sessions, these are our drop-in sessions. Now, our drop-in sessions are a chance to talk about works in progress. If we talk about things like our festival and our working lunch, those are a chance to listen to panel discussions of people sharing about what is going on and what is the best practice out there. These sessions are about what are we working on, and some of it is good and some of it's not. We've got some questions, we've got some answers. Let's kick that around. So our next ones that'll be coming up after this in August, can't believe we're talking about August. We're going to be doing a great session on allyship. I really recommend that you're in for that. We are then having one in September on returnships. You know, we have always been talking about when it comes to inclusion and diversity, those alternate routes, those other ways of getting people into tech are valuable. One of the most valuable is returnship. So if this is something that you've not done before and you're thinking about, or if this is something you're doing, but you're looking for some tips to take that further, you want to sign up for that in September. Now, if you're on this call, you're interested in data. If you're interested in data, chances you are that you know that we are beginning our next data gathering that will be happening for our next report. If you're new to this, not everybody loves us when we're doing it, but the output is really powerful. When you share your data with us, that anonymized aggregated data, we turn that into the annual report that gives those highlights, those headlines. It also gives you probably the only place you can get these benchmarking tools where you can compare your data with companies of your size, your sector, to hear about regions, etc. So I know that it is challenging to share that data. If you have any questions, if you're at all worried about how do I gather the data, do I understand this question, this is a bit different in my company, how do I handle that, then we have, you know it, another drop-in session. So we have data sessions that you can join where you can ask questions, really talk about your data, get the help that you need so that submitting that data in September is easy as you please. So that's us. Do keep in mind, we're going to have some summer holidays. I hope you will too. And then come in September, you will hear about more reports that we're having around those alternate routes to detect. We're going to be having labs and then feeding back to you those things that we're learning about, things like social value, about diversifying your supply chain, looking at global data, etc. Now, if in all the things I'm talking to you about, you're thinking, but Debbie, this is the topic you're not talking about that I really, really need to hear from, please drop us an email. Karen is our director of programs. She's all about the engagement. If there's something we're not talking about, if there's some problem or you've got some great news to share that we're not talking about, please let us know. The Tech Talent Charter is who we are because of you. You as signatories, we don't create content, we curate it. We are not the answers. We convene everyone who is there to make sure those answers are surfaced, that they are amplified, that it goes out across the space. Enough with me. So we were just talking data. When we first started the charter, we knew that data needed to be a cornerstone of what we did. We knew that's what's measured gets done. And that's what made us different when we started in this space, because you know that is the price of admission. Give us your data. Everything else we do with you is free. Don't, and we're going to have to ask you to leave. From that point, back in 2017, when asking data to be shared was edgy, we have moved forward. And 5 years in, what we know from that data is those companies who are the most diverse, the most inclusive in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, who have the most inclusive cultures, have data as a cornerstone to what they do. And it's something that they embed in how they work as an organization and how they drive diversity and inclusion within their space. So that's super. We've built that in, but we also know that some of you have been doing this for a while. Some of you have been gathering data and you're beginning to work in more sophisticated ways. You're starting to take expertise from your data science, from your wider expertise in the organization, to start working and doing things with data differently. This is how Olga showed up on our front doorstep, and we got very excited. Karen and I had a whole geeky data hour talking with Olga about what she does. So Olga, you're at Lloyds Bank. We know Lloyds has been partners from the very earliest days, and we know data's been at the heart of what you do. So welcome to the drop-in session, Olga. Do you want to introduce yourself to everyone?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Debbie. So hi, everyone, and really excited to be here today. So my name is Olga. I work for Lloyds Banking Group, and I'm part of a team that's called System Dynamics. So basically, I'm applying a methodology that is called System Dynamics within Lloyds Banking Group on various projects, trying to help the strategic decision makers kind of navigate through the complexity and uncertainty using the data and using this methodology.
Which I've loved as this has become a part of how business is being done. It really, to the outside, looking outside at the box, it feels like magic, because that's really where you get the really cool insights in doing that. So Olga, talk to me about how your team started using those superpowers to think about DEI within the space and what you were doing at Lloyds. What was the problem you were trying to solve? How did you start in the space?
Yeah, so basically the whole agenda around inclusion and diversity has been kind of at the forefront for Lloyds for a couple of years, kind of even before I joined the bank. And there's been several projects trying to look at it and different initiatives. But what's kind of brought me into the loop last year was that there was a new initiative, a new project starting. And the team, they had kind of a list of ideas, which they we're not sure about which ones to kind of focus on, because there are very, very many ideas of what you can do in the EDI space to improve the situation. But also you have limited resources, and you do want to kind of put your effort into something that will bring the biggest change. So the group of people that were involved in the project, they weren't sure basically where to focus on, and they wanted to use a bit more sort of scientific way of trying and understanding which policies to apply. So that's kind of where we got involved, the system dynamics team, and that's how we started to work on the project, which was called the IND lever. So that's basically looking at the intervention strategies, or the ideas for intervention strategies, and trying to understand whether or not they're going to make a difference.
Okay, so, and I think this is an important, if we're looking at a progression for people in the call of where things are, for some companies, the first step is obviously just starting to gather data of who we've got in the room. Then there is the idea of starting to do initiatives. And some companies are beginning to try and look at how they can gather data on individual initiatives to measure their impact. But this was a new idea of trying to look at it as an entire system, wasn't it? And I think that's the huge leap that's here. So how did you start? So this is super. I've got an idea. I have lots of initiatives. I'm proud that we're gathering data. We have some initiatives. We're trying to measure impact of those initiatives. But how do I use a systems approach? How did you go about it?
Yes, so basically what we initially said was that all of these initiatives might be great in individual sort of context, but the problem is, and that's also why we wanted to apply this systemic approach, because for such a complex problem like changing the diversity in an organization, especially knowing that in the past we've been doing things, but maybe the progress hasn't been as fast as we wanted to. So we wanted to understand why is it not happening at the pace that we wanted to, and also how these things that we have a list of, how are they going to interact with each other? Because you can imagine that there is some idea or some strategy that you want to implement, and you expect that everything will be, unicorns and rainbows, but actually three years down the road, it's going to kick out of the water something else that you didn't even expect is going to happen. So this kind of approach allows us to think through how things are connected between each other, but also like look a little bit through time. So is there something that we don't think of? Like, are there any unintended consequences that we might have not considered? And is it worth trying to put these things together to see whether or not it's worth putting all our effort, even though we think it might be the best thing possible? But is there something that can, kick us down the road and actually make things worse? So that's why we wanted to apply this sort of holistic way of thinking.
And I think it's so important, because there is this sense of, because people can be doing what feels like all the right things and from the right motivations, but there is this problem, I do feel, particularly in large organizations, it's not even necessarily that the right hand doesn't know what the left hand, we're not even sure how many right hands, how many left hands, who's feeding what, who's doing what. So super. So how do you do that? That sounds great on paper. How did you start doing it? How did you start setting that up at Lloyds?
So basically, we had a working group assembled of people from various parts of the organization, and we applied a specific framework that basically allows this methodology, the system dynamics methodology, to be brought into the people world and actually bring in the people into the process of building these models and building this kind of holistic understanding together. So we had this group assembled, and we devised a series of workshops where this working group would come together. And through this methodology, we would go step by step, building one on top of the other. And we would build out this kind of shared mental model of how we think, how we all as a group think the whole problem of representation in the organization has happened in the past. And over this series of workshops, through different exercises and different interactions, and kind of like a bit of homework at the back session and a bit of cleaning up in between, at the first sort of iteration, or like the first chunk of the project, we arrived to this sort of qualitative picture or qualitative understanding that everyone kind of inputted in. And so we could say, okay, so this is the problem that we were trying to sort of describe and understand. And here is the structure that we think is responsible for this problem to behave the way it did for the past 10 years or so.
Good. Now, can I check on those people who were in the room? Who were they? Because these were not just a bunch of data scientists within Lloyds coming together. Who were the people that were in this working group?
So they were basically people from, as I said, different departments. So there were people who are data scientists and people who are like doing data analysis, like me, for example, but from a bit of a different perspective. And there were people who are responsible for like the ideation and implementation of measures, because they were the ones who actually had the background knowledge on, well, this is what this policy, for example, means. There were people from design who would help us think, okay, so what are we doing? Or there were people also who are doing design research, so they would know like things from kind of like out there in the industry in general. What are the trends that we know that exist that we may not have the data on it inside, but we know that this is the things that are happening out there. And also basically representatives from group inclusion and diversity. So they were the people who are driving the inclusion and diversity agenda inside. They're the ones to make sure that whatever we're trying to do is, in line with the generic guidance for inclusion and diversity, and also what is the general principles for driving this kind of agenda.
And that's really important on a number of levels. One, we've always said and known, when we're really wanting to drive inclusion and diversity, this is not something you outsource and it's only done by inclusion and diversity, but equally they have to be in the room. So this bringing of the wider practitioners, the data scientists, and people who work with data and impact, and then the people leading the DE&I, that is an investment, isn't it? I mean, I think it's important for us to realize in organizations who are doing this is not something that's done overnight or just as an easy, quick hack day and you're done. This was an investment to really try and create an effective model to measure impact, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the project, and it was kind of like a trial project, because we knew that it's a kind of new methodology to try out for this particular problem. We didn't want to commit like a whole, half of the organization to be doing this. So we wanted to try and learn quick and test and learn, essentially. But this project took essentially 6 months or so. So the first part was about 3 months, so half of the time was the qualitative bit where we were actively engaging with the stakeholders, and the second half was the quantitative part, because as a group we decided, okay, so now we have this qualitative understanding, but it would be good to know how accurate we are in this kind of mental model of why the problem exists. Because if we do have this robustness of our understanding, then we can say, okay, if we are to test this policy, we're more certain that the effect will be XYZ, for example. Because if you just have kind of a qualitative understanding, which is always great, because that's also where most of the insight actually came from. But the reason why you would want to have it on the quantitative side as well, and why we wanted to build a simulation model, is to actually be a bit more sure in terms of, these are the suggestions that we're saying, and this is how sure we are. So it's not just based on the qualitative understanding, it is also backed up by all the data that we were able to get in.
Super. And then let me just make sure again, so we all understand in the room, the scope that you were looking at, was this the entire employment life cycle? So this was not just for recruitment, but were we looking at recruitment, growth, promotion, retention, all of that piece? When you were looking at it as a system, it was the entire employment life cycle?
Yes, so it was the entire thing. Also because the different policies were trying to sort of, impact different parts of this process. And also because we knew if you're only focusing on one part of the equation, you might be not seeing what is happening on the other side. So we decided from the beginning that we would need to incorporate all of these things as different pieces of one puzzle.
And I think this is another reason why Karen and I were so excited when we were talking to you about it, because there's a huge microscope on the recruitment piece, isn't there, about how do we get them in the door?
Mm-hmm.
But we're not looking at, are we keeping them? Are we growing them? And we know the knock-on effects. So I think the fact that you scoped the whole employment life cycle, it could have been very interesting, but not as impactful to just say, let's look at the whole of the recruitment and onboarding process, but to look at the whole piece. All right, so super. We get a sense of how you scoped it, how long it was, who was in the room, how did you stage the process? So from where we are right now, what are the learnings, both about the DEI, but also about this approach? Where are we now and what have we learned?
Yes, so from the point of view of the context learning, right? So from the inclusion and diversity perspective. So what we did say, and what we kind of hypothesized in the qualitative part, was that there are some things which was a bit counterintuitive. So there are some policies or some actions that when we put it in a simulation model, it turned out to be that you were actually doing, like, making things worse if you were to do nothing. So there was some combination of policies that if you were to switch them on, they would actually aggravate the situation, and compared to if you were to do nothing. And
I'm
so
going to stop you there because Olga, that's huge. And I think that is something, and I'm not going to make a pressure for you to say, and what was that strategy? Because this will be unique to every organization, won't it? Because you've got to look at the system within your organization. But I think a powerful thing that we would take away from that is you've got a data-led model that shows with systems analysis that there's some initiatives that actually do more damage carrying that out than if you'd not done anything at all.
Yes, so essentially it is about which strategies and also the combination of them, because that's exactly the thing of them interacting with each other that made it sort of realize that, okay, well, we may not want to just do this, because the policy in itself isn't bad or good. It's how it interacts with the overarching system and how they interact with each other. That's what's kind of the trouble. So that is the thing about it. So it's not just, oh, well, this is a bad policy, we're not implementing this. This is not about this. The story is about how do we make sure that we are harnessing the power of all of those things, but we're not, damaging ourselves by not looking at the combinations that might not be beneficial for us.
And it's really important. I don't want people to be risk averse. I don't want people to be fearful, but I do worry sometimes when you get corporates who get overexcited and they do that, let's just do everything. And I remember once having an executive say to me from a company I won't name, well, it can't hurt, can it? We're just going to try everything, see what hits, because what could be the worst thing that happens? And it is one of those things we have to say, well, we don't know, but there can be worse things. There are combinations. And so it is that trying to take that holistic approach, and where you have the size of data and the expertise to begin modeling and doing that, it becomes really, really powerful. Okay, anything else from that? And then we'll look at the approach itself. So is there anything else you learned from that, looking at EDI and what you tried to find out? Was there anything that, good surprises, bad surprises, or questions that you're still grappling with, the model doesn't help or doesn't explain yet?
So because we only looked at it on a very kind of high level, so of course there will be questions like, well, when the organization is changing, what is happening? Like, what impacts does it make for the whole inclusion and diversity and the representation, right? So this is like a whole new piece that you would want to integrate. So the model as it was just looking as is and some scenarios of what could happen. So there are still outstanding questions, and there will always be outstanding questions that you would be like, oh, what about this? The other thing is also obviously, so we looked at the whole of the bank, but of course different divisions, they would initially have different composition, right? So the ones that are traditionally more diverse, they probably wouldn't struggle with the challenges that, for example, engineering and tech job families are struggling with. So in a way, you have this holistic understanding, but also you can't just say, well, this applies to everyone at the same level. So there is this piece about, well, we would need to disaggregate and basically say, okay, well, this probably will apply to the rest of them, and this is probably slightly different. And that's where the whole challenge again comes in terms of data, because the lower level you go, the less is availability of the data, and that's where you start to kind of struggle to actually define how robust your representation is. But still, like it's useful. Like, as we say, it's better than nothing. So you might as well try it and see how close it is, or like what kind of insight it gives you. And because it's quite labor intensive in terms of the time and also the resources it takes, as I said before, the qualitative side of it, which is just the bringing of the people together and trying to look at the system as a whole, I think what it created as an insight, or like the good outcome, was that it allowed the people in the room to kind of shift their thinking from just I don't want to say siloed, because it's it's specialized in a specific way, but to just shift this thinking from, okay, we need to focus on this, because there were people who would come into the room and say, okay, well, this is what the business told us, and we need to do this, and we need to kind of focus on this. And through the workshops, they've kind of realized, well, actually, we need to think of those things as a system. And that was one of the good things that came out of the approach, because it's not just about the outcome, you know, it's also about the process and kind of like what people have experienced throughout.
Yeah, and I think this is important, because if I were going to go back into my company to sell this as an idea, what we've got to beware are those executives who they're looking for the shiny answer, aren't they? So what we want to make sure is that what we're not saying is, if we do like Lloyds did, it will become this black box that spits out some interesting answers that give us the 3 reasons. So it's not that. But I think what's interesting is that you were talking about the process itself, the qualitative process itself had net benefit. And I like what you were saying, because I think there's an element of, we talk about siloed thinking as if it is evil or bad, where in fact it's actually kind of a necessary sanity to some degree on how we do our jobs. Our job is to remember when we need people out of the silos to see the system, and then go back in to make it work in that way. And so it's not to castigate those within the silo, because that deep level expertise is invaluable and it's essential for delivery, for effective delivery. But it's, as an organization, how are we creating those systems to go up out of the silo onto that helicopter, to look at the whole system, then to go back with that learning. So I think, you know, if I were on a call and I were trying to think about it, and I, you know, maybe even if I'm a smaller organization that doesn't have vast resources, trying to find ways to get those key stakeholders to think about the system as a whole, to interrogate what we know qualitatively while trying to get the data. But then there's that piece of where we can afford, where we can build in that capacity to bring good data practices and systems thinking. That's where it starts going to that magical level, but not magic. Because it doesn't, because it's, I think the thing we always need to remind ourselves, you know, we still have so much excitement around data. There's still that thing is that data will give us an answer, where in fact, most often data just gives us better and better questions and give ideas and suggestions to keep testing. So tell me if I'm wrong. So what I'm hearing from what you said is this 6-month pilot gave you quite a strong, useful, large scale macro system level. What needs to be cited then is how can it be usefully used to then measure when there's change at the macro, but also then to understand that its real meaning and power becomes on how do you disaggregate meaningfully to get some micro insights, etc. But that's the next phase. But even this first phase creates some interesting insights, outputs, and actions coming out of it. So even if nothing else came, you've got some useful different ways of working. But you also have a model that can have other uses and be returned to in different ways.
And I think that's a really, really good and fair summary of what it creates. And I think on top of that, what it also helps, even when you don't have any data, if you haven't been collecting anything, this process can actually help you identify which data points to collect. So you can say, okay, so we have this problem, and then you start to hypothesize how things are related. You start to think, okay, this is because of this, this is because of that. And then you think, well, actually, how do we know that it is like this? And you say, oh, it would be good if we had data on this. And then you know, well, this is the data we would need to collect. So this starts to basically structure your sort of like thinking about, well, we don't need to kind of collect the data on everything, because that's just going to be overwhelming. But we do need to collect the data that's going to help us move forward. And from this process, you can identify which data points would be helpful for you and for the purpose that you're trying to solve, to collect these data points and be consistent, obviously, in their collection. And that's how it can also help kind of move you from not doing much on the data to actually starting to think about how to do it and actually collecting the points that are relevant for you, and not just whatever is suggested by external survey, for example.
So if I'm in the room and I'm thinking, feeling daunted because I'm not Lloyds, we've not been gathering data for years, we're not really comfortable, that actually doesn't have to be a liability, because like you say, if we start with systems thinking, we could actually become more effective in the data that we're gathering. So
Mm.
there's lots of starts and entry points into this. So I can be a company that has a lot of data, so gathering together to try and make use of the data to build the model. But equally, I cannot have much data, but I can use it to design very different data models. So tell me other things then, in terms of, if you were going to go back and do it again, were there any mistakes, errors, false starts, if you were going to start all over again? And I was going to learn from you so that I could get farther, faster, do things. What would you do differently to start this project off?
So I think the thing that we didn't have was external expertise being part of the working group, because we did have people from inside, but sometimes it can be tricky to basically look internally and not actually maybe see what is it that we're not asking, you know? So we're trying to be objective, especially us, like the data analysts. We're trying to kind of take a step back and be objective and say, okay, what about this and what about that? But still, when you're part of the same organization, you're prone to maybe think in the same way, you're prone to see the same things, and you may not be exposed to things that people who are working broadly in the industry, or people who are just doing this specific topic out there, you may not be considering this question. So I think if it was to repeat again, it would be great to have somebody externally and somebody who is specialized in inclusion and diversity as their sort of area of expertise, because that kind of knowledge is very rare. And especially if you are sort of out there in the world, you do get exposure to many things in different organizations. So kind of bringing this perspective into the project would be great. And not something I would do differently, but if it was something under my control, the change of people, because every organization goes through a change. Obviously, people move on, different roles, different jobs. But this project has seen a change of the working group, which was dramatic. Like basically we started with a working group that have changed completely, and like towards the end of it. And that basically is what we call organizational knowledge, right? So all of this is kind of been and gone. And essentially there is this memory that's almost not completely, but it is part of it is lost. So it's not something I would change, and it's not something anyone can control. But hopefully there are ways to kind of retain this knowledge even when people leave. So we did keep quite a good log, so it wouldn't be something to change, but maybe an advice for projects like this. So documentation is quite important, because when people leave, you can always go back to, let's say, like a journal of how things were going, or which decisions you made at which point, so that you can understand the train of thought or the logic that was happening throughout the project. And then you can see how it went and how it evolved, so that you're not really just thrown into the ocean when you're new to the project. And that's how we could retain this knowledge.
And I think that's really valuable, but that is equally true of most things that happen around D&I, isn't it? Of churn. You know, it's very susceptible to churn. And I think finding sustainable, scalable ways of capturing learning, capturing that institutional knowledge. We see that from outside with working with organizations of Tech Talent Charter. We've had times where we kind of explain to people in organizations what they used to do. And this is often true, you know, whereas companies are quite good at capturing institutional knowledges in governance meetings and those sorts of things. Working groups, particularly when you start getting real speed and passion and enthusiasm in a project, there's a lot that can happen in our heads if we're not capturing and capturing those learnings as we go. I think organizations can be quite good at retros, but if you're not able to guarantee that continuity throughout, those retros can miss some really valuable insights. Is there anything else? We've got one or two questions that have sort of come up from the piece. Do anyone that wants to throw in questions? I'm going to say, is there anything else, if I were coming off the call now, is there anything else that you think I should know or remember if I were setting out to try and do something similar in my own company?
I think one of the main things is basically getting the breadth of people, because again, as an inclusion and diversity, the differences in perspectives, they do tremendously enhance the value that you get overall, because you cannot underestimate this, you know. So as much as possible, getting the working group of people that is from different areas, from different grades, from different kind of like job families or whatever that is relevant to the problem, obviously, because if you just involve somebody who is like, well, what it is about, course this is not sensible. But as much as it's relevant to the problem, the breadth or the diversity of the working group, I think, is very key. And also getting the buy-in from quite a senior leader, that is also quite helpful, because especially when the project gets the momentum or when there are some pitfalls, you would want this kind of support from a bit higher up to say, okay, yes, this is still a priority. We still want this to continue to work on. And that's how you can kind of overcome whatever hurdles there are, because there will be hurdles in any project. So if there is this kind of support that comes from higher up that says, okay, yes, it's still the priority, let's try and make it happen, whatever it takes, not whatever it takes, but yeah, if we can move things around and support, so that is also really, really helpful.
Okay, so I get my business case really solid, and I get that senior stakeholder, that sponsor for the project, that is my rock solid go-to when we had hard things. I make sure that I scope it out, and I'm not going for something too small, but not something massive. All right, this idea of piloting and keeping it reasonably agile. I want as diverse a group as possible. Who knew diversity makes importance? But I liked what you were saying about job families, job titles and grades, insiders, outsiders, then the specialisms. The more we can get a diverse table, the better the outcomes.
Yeah.
To understand and value the qualitative as well as the quantitative, to really make sure that we're clear about what that model can and can't do, to keep a really good log in terms of continuity. Am I getting most of those things?
And probably if you are very new to this, you would want a person who is somewhat trained in facilitating this kind of sessions and actually interpreting whatever is coming out into the shared vision in whichever form that is. But if you are just, if you think it's just any other workshop, you might run into like, oh my God, how do I take in all of this insight and all of this information and actually interpret it? So you would, especially if you are new to this or you haven't encountered this before, you would want somebody who does know what and how to interpret all of this information.
Okay, super. So I'm hearing DE&I expertise, and if you can get some external, super. I'm hearing the data science, the modeling. I'm hearing facilitation. And I'm hearing then this interpretation. What do you do with what you've got so that comes through? Super. Okay. So I'm throwing open for mics and suggestions. Now, if you are somebody who is either at a much earlier stage, a similar stage, or farther along doing that, please, and again, this is not to put you on the spot, but what we've had sometimes is in the room, people talk about, well, we're doing something that's similar or adjacent or earlier, or I know of another thing in that respect. Thinking about if you're in a smaller organization, are there things that you're doing? Because remember, when we're talking about this can be about a big sophisticated model that is built, and it's a data science-y model. But remember, I think what Olga was talking about, we can do this in the small scale. We can do this in a small organization. It is that holistic systems thinking. So you could be talking about this in an SME. You could be doing this on a different piece. So I'm waiting to see if anyone else at all on the call is doing anything along that in the space. Okay, so one of the questions, then if anyone has questions to throw to Olga, you can come on microphone or you can type it into the chat session. Now, I'm couching this in terms of, I'm not asking you to tell all of the dirty laundry or things that would get you into trouble at talking about Lloyds. But were there any things, like, I think what raised people's eyebrows, and Nikki, you was one of the people to say, what are the things that you were hearing don't do in isolation because it can cause damage in isolation? Are you in a position where you can talk about some of those things as examples?
Yeah, so just generically speaking,
yeah,
when we talk about two sides of the employee journey, so we have recruitment, right? We have retention, and we have people who are leaving the organization. So there are various things that you can do on those sides of the process. And the thing that we have observed that were not really positive in terms of the outcomes that we were trying to achieve, where if you only focused on kind of bringing new talent and creating positions, whichever way that is, and actually not addressing which or like how attractive are the jobs, or how attractive are the jobs that you're putting out there. Because the thing is, you might be creating all of these vacancies which people will apply to, but not addressing the vacancy itself may not attract the talent that you're looking for. So you might be actually either just like putting your system even more into imbalance, or you might be draining people through the system because, for example, your retention isn't great. So you could be doing things that are detrimental because you're not addressing the thing that should be enabling these things to work in combination. So that's kind of like the two things that were, they need to work in combination. So basically creating opportunities for people to join, but also making sure that whatever you are creating is written in a language, if we say it in this way, right? Because there are like things like Textio, for example, that reads out what are they, or like calls out the things that are not potentially attractive to diverse candidates. So doing all of those things or not doing all of those things and just creating vacancies may not actually allow you to achieve the ambition.
Yeah, there is that old thinking, if we build it, they will come, isn't it? That sense of course it'll be, and it's really understanding that in a more granular way. All right, so any other questions from the audience? We've had a few people who've had to pop off but are asking to see the recordings. I always promise if we finish early, we finish early. Olga, I'd love to have you back at another point in the future, because I think there's some really powerful insights, and we've been getting a lot of personal messages coming through of people might want to reach out to you privately to ask certain things in that respect. If there's no other questions from the audience, Olga, we're going to try and we will make a recording this and share it, but I also want to, I know Karen and I want to work with you on how do we capture a sort of blueprint for how you did this, because I do see this as a leading edge piece. If we were describing this as a session, I would call this not, Karen and I were talking about it because we think quite often in the space, particularly if we're involving women, the more that we make this sound like an expert session, more people wouldn't come along because they would say, oh, I'm not an expert. But this is getting into the hardcore. This is exciting. This is more of the bleeding edge of how we can and should be thinking about DE&I. But I really appreciate how you've described it in a way that it offers us pathways, whatever stage we're on, whatever company we're at, because I think this systems thinking that is fed into and led by data, I think is the way forward, where we're going to start seeing the real things. We've seen lots of great things happening in inclusion and diversity, but there's always that question. So why are we not seeing the big numbers? I think this approach can offer some insights into why that's the case. So Olga, I know how crazy busy we are, and you are, and I really appreciate you taking the time, and I want to get you back another time soon. So thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me. It was really, really enjoyable session.
And thank you all, listen, for being on the call. Thank you both for the messages that you put in the chat and for the private chat messages that have come through. We're going to put this recording out. If you've got questions you wish we'd covered and we got more time from Olga, or we want to go deeper into some of the things that she talked about, please let us know. I hope you sign up for another session. If there's anything else we can do at the Tech Talent Charter to help you, to help your company on its journey to really drive this inclusion and diversity, just let us know. You've got 15 minutes. I won't tell anyone. Go enjoy it. Go use it. And I'll see you again soon. Take care, everyone. Yes. Bye-bye.